Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a historical detective story that honestly spans centuries, crosses continents, and ties into some of the most famous myths in all of Western civilization. We're going to track the absolutely incredible evolution of a guy named Joseph of Arimathea. It's a wild journey of how a relatively minor historical figure got completely reinvented thanks to mistranslations, some very clever medieval marketing, and a legendary blood-stained cloth. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly did a 1st century Judean tomb owner become the mystical guardian of King Arthur's Holy Grail? It's a great question, right? Because if you look at the original texts, Joseph barely even makes an appearance. But fast forward 1,000 years, and boom, he's suddenly the central figure in Arthurian romance. He's the founder of Christianity in Britain and the very first keeper of the Holy Grail. I mean, how does a 1st century guy get magically teleported into the legends of King Arthur? Well, to figure that out, we have to peel back the layers of history. Okay, let's get right into Section 1, The Secret Disciple. Let's start with the actual, foundational 1st century texts. Long before anyone was talking about a Holy Grail, we just had the Gospels. And in the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Joseph of Arimathea actually has a really specific, pretty limited role. He's described as a wealthy guy, a respected member of the Sanhedrin Council, and a secret disciple of Jesus. After the crucifixion, he simply asks Pontius Pilate for Jesus' body. He provides a clean linen shroud to wrap it in, and then places it in his own newly carved rock tomb. And, well, that's essentially the whole shebang. But contrast that with the medieval version of Joseph. Suddenly, he's this globe-trotting missionary, the first Christian bishop of Britain, and the mystical guardian of the Grail. The gap between these two versions of the exact same man is just staggering. To put this into perspective, for hundreds of years, Joseph's story barely changed at all. In the 4th century, there's this apocryphal text called the Gospel of Nicodemus, and it adds a little story about Joseph being imprisoned by Jewish elders and miraculously escaping. But crucially, he remained squarely in the Middle East. It wasn't until the 12th century, literally over 1,000 years after the fact, that writers like Robert de Boron and William of Malmesbury suddenly relocated Joseph to Britain and handed him a magical cup. So what on earth changed in the 12th century?
That brings us to Section 2, the Glastonbury legends.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how our story completely transitions to England, where Joseph's resume gets a major and, let's be honest, highly suspicious update. Enter Glastonbury Abbey. In the year 1184, a massive fire completely devastated the abbey. The monks there were desperate for funds to rebuild. And you know, in the Middle Ages, the absolute best way to raise money was pilgrim tourism. So, entirely by coincidence, in 1191, the monks miraculously discovered the graves of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere right there on the abbey grounds. No way, right? And soon after that, they claimed to have found Joseph of Arimathea's tomb too, complete with 2 cruets containing the blood and sweat of Jesus. It was, quite frankly, a brilliantly spun medieval fundraising campaign. And they didn't stop there. They even had a local miracle to back the whole thing up. According to this newly minted legend, when Joseph arrived in Britain, he was completely exhausted. He supposedly thrust his wooden walking staff into the ground at Wearyall Hill, just outside Glastonbury. By morning, legend says it miraculously took root and blossomed into the Glastonbury thorn. This was a specific tree that uniquely flowered twice a year, at Easter and Christmas. So the absolutely crucial point to take away here is that this wasn't some ancient tradition. In fact, modern scholars have pinpointed exactly how this scam happened. Around 1247, the Glastonbury monks literally just added margin notes to an older 1125 history book by William of Malmesbury. They straight up inserted a claim that the Apostle Philip sent Joseph to Britain. It was an outright fabrication, designed, as the historical texts openly say, in order to increase the abbey's prestige and thus its pilgrim trade and prosperity. Pure and simple medieval marketing. Let's shift gears to Section 3, Keeper of the Grail. So while the English monks were using Joseph to boost their local real estate value, French poets were busy using him to create the ultimate mythological artifact. Around the late 12th century, a writer named Robert de Boron wrote a poem called Joseph d'Arimathea. Robert basically took those older texts about Joseph's imprisonment and expanded them, but he added a massive, game-changing twist. He wrote that Joseph didn't just bury Jesus. He also took the cup from the Last Supper and used it to catch the blood dripping from Jesus on the cross at Golgotha. And then, when Joseph was imprisoned, this grail magically sustained him with food for 40 years. But hold on a second. What exactly was a grail? Well, according to a writer from that exact same era, Helenand of Freudmont, the word grail comes from the Latin gradalis. And here's the kicker. It didn't originally mean a cup at all. It actually meant a wide dish or platter that was brought to the table by degree or in stages. Now keep that specific phrase, in stages, in the back of your mind. It plants a very important seed that the Grail's true nature might be about something being revealed gradually, rather than just being a cup that holds liquid. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, the shroud connection. Now this brings us to a seriously fascinating theory by scholar Dr. Dan Scavone. He actually links the whole myth of the Grail directly to the Byzantine Empire in the East. Think back to the Bible for a second. Joseph's only real tangible connection to Jesus was providing that linen burial shroud, right? Well, for centuries in the Middle East, specifically in the city of Edessa, there was this highly venerated, highly mysterious cloth icon known as the Mandalion. It was said to bear a miraculous image of Jesus. Ancient texts call it a tetraduplan, which literally means a cloth folded in 8 layers. Because it was kept so tightly folded inside a case, most people just thought it was a picture of a face. But supposedly hidden within all those folds was a full body impression of a crucified man covered in blood. Now, this cloth was incredibly top secret, so it was rarely shown to the public. But we actually have an ancient text called the Oldest Latin Abgar Legend, and it describes the highly secretive ritual of how it was displayed. Remember that phrase, in stages? Well, the text says that during the Easter ritual, the cloth would be unfolded in stages, changing its appearance to represent different ages of Jesus. At the first hour, it showed his infancy, at the third hour, a boy, at the sixth hour, an adolescent, and finally, it was completely opened up to reveal the crucified Jesus. And this is where it all clicks together. It brilliantly illustrates the connection to the French romances. Because in a 13th century Grail romance called Peril's Vows, when the knight Gawain finally looks into the Holy Grail, what exactly does he see? He sees a chalice that changes into a child, and then into the crucified Jesus. It's a perfect match. The Grail romances are identically mirroring that gradual, stage-by-stage, unfolding ritual of the Edessa burial shroud. What happened was, returning crusaders had heard these wild rumors of an awe-inspiring, blood-stained relic tied to Jesus' burial. And by the time those stories made it back west, the burial cloth of Joseph of Arimathea had basically transformed into the Holy Grail. All right, let's bring it all home in Section 5, a tale of mistranslation. So that still leaves us with one really huge, glaring question. How on earth did a Middle Eastern shroud icon end up being associated with Britain? Well, we actually have a linguistic smoking gun. Let's go all the way back to the year 170 AD. In a book chronicling the popes, a 6th century scribe inserted a very weird little note. He wrote that in the year 170, Pope Eleutherius received a letter from a British King Lucius asking to become a Christian. This little note was then copied by later historians like the Venerable Bede, and eventually the monks at Glastonbury used it to claim their ancient British Christian heritage. The only problem? There were absolutely no kings in Britain in 70 AD. It was a Roman province. Fast forward to 1904, and a scholar named Adolf Harnack finally cracked the case. He dug into the records and discovered that there was only one Christian king, Lucius, in the entire world at that specific time. His name was Lucius Aelius Septimius Magus Ebgarus VIII. And guess what? He was the king of Edessa, the exact same city in modern-day Turkey where that mysterious folded shroud was kept. Okay, get ready, because here is the absolute mic drop moment of this explainer. Why did that 6th century scribe think King Lucius was from Britain? Well, the royal palace complex in Edessa was known in Latin as Britio Edessanorum. That's right, a simple, careless scribe just misread the word Britio, which meant the citadel of Edessa, and he wrote down Britannia, meaning Britain. That single spelling mistake accidentally teleported the entire legend of early Christianity, Joseph of Arimathea, and the holy relics thousands of miles to the west. Let's quickly sum up this insane, centuries-long game of historical telephone. In the 1st century, Joseph simply provides a burial shroud, nothing more. Then, in the 2nd century, a king in Edessa, also known as Britio, converts to Christianity and happens to possess a mysterious folded shroud icon. By the 6th century, a scribe miscopies Britio as Britannia. And finally, by the 12th century, opportunistic monks and highly imaginative romancers take that typo, combine it with crusaders' rumors of a blood-stained shroud, and invent the Holy Grail, all while claiming Joseph of Arimathea as the founder of British Christianity. It is a masterclass in amplification, transposition, and contamination at work over a millennium. It really makes you step back and think, doesn't it? The majestic stories of King Arthur, the mystical quest for the Holy Grail, the foundational myths of a nation's faith, they're all intricately tied to a single typo by a tired scribe and a fundraising campaign by monks with a burnt-down abbey. So I'm going to leave you with this to ponder. How much of our modern history, the stories we hold as profound truths, is just the result of a simple clerical error or a brilliantly spun medieval marketing campaign? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and always keep questioning the history you think you know.